need to do it from now. Good to see you all. I have the pleasure of introducing Joe Dan Lowry. Joe Dan has been the curator of the Turquoise Museum since its founding in 1993. But I was really hoping to actually find some early childhood pictures, because I fully expect that he probably had either a turquoise rattle or a turquoise pacifier or something along that line, because he's certainly been immersed in the world of turquoise all of his life. He's been to over 50 turquoise museums around the world to both research and mine turquoise as a lapidist. He's been cutting turquoise from the widest variety of turquoise of pretty much anybody in the world, and as an appraiser, he's worked with some of the largest institutions around the world. And his studies in turquoise history, mineralogy, gemology are, as you well know, a lot of the published standards out there. And for those of you who haven't seen the books and so forth, I personally have to have those materials and everything to use as reference. Are you not hearing me?
Can you turn the mic on?
Well, is that any better? I don't think you want me to go over that again.
It sounded really good up here, so you can repeat it. Go ahead.
Just
So-
back to the pacifier. The
You like-
turquoise pacifier.
you like that?
I
You
like
like
the
that?
turquoise
I didn't.
pacifier.
So, yeah, well, you know, but again, he's gonna be talking about fingerprinting today, and I think that's a wonderful follow-on to some of the things that Dr. Palkey was talking about earlier, so.
Morning or afternoon, everybody.
Morning.
How is everybody today? Good. You guys enjoying the show so far?
Yes.
Yes. That would be my son. But I also would like you to know that the symposium portion is being sponsored by one of our friends, and also somebody who's been in this industry for a very long time, and that is GL Miller, who has GL Studios. So if you are upstairs in looking around the different booths, please stop by. He has a gorgeous, lovely wife, and they do turquoise. He's an incredible artist and all of that. So GL Studios is the one that has been sponsoring the symposium sessions. So we need to be sure we give a shout out to them. Welcome. I always appreciate when somebody shows up. I was only counting on my mom today, so in case none of you know, my mom is right back there. And that's also my defense. So if you're picking on me, that's my mom. Alright. Unlike some of your presentations, which I have thoroughly enjoyed, I just enjoyed listening to Alex on his presentation on Arkansas turquoise. It was, I'm a geek, but listening to him with his passion and with his humor and all of those things combined into his presentation was informative, and I enjoyed it. So in case you don't know, Alex is back there. He's one of the younger guys, but it takes time for people to present. It takes time for you guys to come, and we want to value that time and value the money you spent and appreciate you. So we do. And then Aaron Dr. Palkey on his talk, almost makes me want to change some of the things on my talk, because he actually, has that category. I have people who teach me the science, but I don't comprehend the inner workings of the science. And so part of what we'll be talking about today is I try to, in my education and how I try to develop categories out, all of us have different knowledges, all of us have different bases of our thoughts and the reasons, and that is a majority of what I want to talk about, because before we ever get into a science, we have to realize that, in my opinion, the greatest science in the world is anthropology, because how we think and how we're taught to think is part of how we interpret. So like if you see a car accident and you have 7 people, you could have 7 different angles, and you could have 7 different reasons for how they say they witnessed a car accident. Turquoise is not a car accident. It's much worse. It is complicated, but it takes everybody. And so what we're trying to do at Turquoise United is bring in everybody. Bring somebody who has just one little point that everybody's been killing them on for 10 years, but they're right. bring them, let them have that voice and bring the different groups in to where that turquoise can be showcased to the world in its variety of people and the gemstone, but actually the value of the people and the gemstone also. So, that all being said, my title is Turquoise Greater Than Science? And is it possible to identify markers that will consistently differentiate and give you an origin to the source? I believe that the answer is no. I don't think it's possible with today's science techniques. I think that they've been done a lot of tests. To give you an idea, my grandfather, when they started doing the fingerprinting on turquoise, my grandfather was one that they came to, and he donated to Joan Mathian and their group multiple pieces of turquoise, and because he knew the sources. And so we've always been involved in that. My uncle, after my grandpa, he did the same. My father and I do the same. So we're really interested in anything people have to do about turquoise and what the processes can be. But it doesn't mean that we're always right in how we apply our sciences. And so by exploring a broader picture about turquoise through the eyes of those who have written, mined, researched it, I think we can come to a better comprehension of what turquoise is, and then apply the scientific principles and see if we can clear some of the muddiness of how science correlates to turquoise, which is a very broad subject. I will say that most scientific studies to prove fingerprinting of turquoise is possible have all been proved wrong, and they are the ones that prove them wrong, so I'm not telling them anything they don't know. If you publish one paper, you know, you can use a microscope and tell out of 40 samples, and then their next paper 5 years later says that wasn't right, but we've discovered this way. And so I'm not saying anything unusual by saying that they have failed on those categories. It's just that turquoise is so comprehensive. It's the most complicated mineral in the history of mankind. And if you don't think that's true, just the people in here probably have 10 different opinions on all of the different subjects. And it's that complicated. But we have hope for the future because science doesn't stop the pursuing. So, let me see here. I have to remember how my son tells me to do these things. There we go. So, can the archaeologists and anthropologists around the world establish a better trade route and historical timelines if they could fingerprint turquoise? The whole push to fingerprint turquoise and know its source of origin is not about the consumer generally. It is about the archaeologists and the anthropologists wanting to comprehend better timelines in history and trade routes. So you've all heard of Chaco Canyon, or you've heard of different places around the world. In the southern New Mexico, and I think one of the coolest places is Swartz Ruin. So there's lots of different ways that they're trying to correlate. If I find turquoise here, or if I find a copper belt here, or if I find a piece of jewelry here, where did they get the materials to make it? Was it local? Was it regional? Was it traded long distance? And then what does that do for the history of how the movement of people came to, whether it's the Western Hemisphere or anybody else? So that's generally the main people that are looking to do this. But it also can be like Dr. Palke said in his presentation that, I don't remember the gemstone he used, but they were different areas have a greater value, and that leads to some people misrepresenting the area where something came from because they want the higher value. And that can also occur in turquoise. So there's different ways that, and values to if we could figure out how to fingerprint turquoise. Those are the two. So we would have to identify markers, and those markers would have to be consistent without much variable. So the goals for my presentation, pretty simple. Establish a new standard for studying turquoise. Demonstrate the reasons why the common sense approach has been lacking in past academic studies of turquoise. Advocate for turquoise information, marketing, and museum displays around the world to be corrected. You don't know how hard it is to get museum people to change. It's insane. Show the limitations of the testing of the turquoise specimen samples and why it is a difficult mineral to fingerprint. and then create a fresh start for the future. As Dr. Palke was saying, the Turquoise Museum and the GIA are trying to work together to our talents that they have with equipment, our talents that we have with collections is just the beginning, because a true study of turquoise has to involve a whole lot of people. And so we're just starting that out. And hopefully get it done for everybody. So no matter how, we try. So I heard this quote, third person, the other day. I thought it was appropriate. The guy said, when I start to write a book or an article, I go into it by trying to assume that I know nothing about the turquoise or the subject. When I ask people, what do you know about turquoise? And they say nothing. I always ask them, so turquoise comes in what colors? Blue. I said, so you assume you know something about turquoise, but they might not have heard of green, or they might not have heard of white. And so we all are coming and trying to learn. In the Western Hemisphere studies, I believe that the little picture I have on the side, they were my inspiration. Because no matter how many times you try to tell everybody that you don't need everybody else to come to a conclusion, you'd be wrong. And that's where the comprehension of being inclusive comes in. So I'm gonna get started on anthropology. And anthropology essentially is the study of human behavior, how we think, what our motivation is, how we grow in our knowledge. Until the science world starts to learn turquoise from the miner's perspective and from the lapidary's perspective, they can't really interpret the archaeological find that they have, because they don't understand turquoise, because turquoise is bigger than science. You have to be able to realize the great variety there is even within a turquoise mine, let alone a turquoise region. And so it's hard to be inclusive that way, because you have a balance. You have so much money of a grant to do a study, and you only have so much time to travel. You only have so much money to travel or to access the testing. And so when you are developing all of those at once, you're looking at millions of dollars, not $100,000. And so the tests are always done small, because nobody wants to fund that much money. It's turquoise. And so for us to evolve in our knowledge, we're gonna have to overcome some of our past tendencies. And so getting started on that is real important. So in turquoise, there have been very few scientists or academic scholars that have used science to come to their conclusions. But generally what happens in the original turquoise studies on fingerprinting turquoise is that they have used it according to culture and according to people's opinions, but they haven't applied science. And so when you read their papers, they'll have a whole introduction about turquoise has been around for 5,000 years, and turquoise has been traded in Persia and Egypt, and here we are in America. And then they go into the Native American culture is this, and the Native American culture is that. And then they'll have 3 sentences about their study. If you're gonna scientifically study the subject turquoise, then you need to scientifically study the turquoise. That does not mean that we're going to sit there and be impressed with what the art form is. That's insignificant to the actual study of the mineral turquoise. And so in dealing with that, also not very many archaeological groups have spoken out and said the information in some of the books, some of the museums, some of the parks needs to be corrected. And my understanding of science is, if we're gonna say we are a scientist, then we're generally working towards knowledge. We generally don't fold our arms and say we got it. Science is the continuation. And so, as a fun one, Chaco Canyon, Cerritos Hills Park, and many others need to change their information, because it has been proven that turquoise is broader than that, or it's regional. And so that's part of the presentation that I'll get in trouble for. But that's okay, I want to call them out. We've listened for over 100 years, and I'm gonna show you how. All right, and so this is important. Until we put Cerritos and the white man's history, where it started and elevated from in perspective, we will never be able to look at just turquoise without the human perspective. So, this is a map, and these are some of the influences that I'd like to talk about. So everybody's heard of the Santa Fe Trail? That's how the white man got out here. The Spanish came out here. Native American was already here. All three cultures came together, gathered at the big event called Santa Fe. And that is why this is the central focus, is that if you are getting in your car, or you're getting on an airline, or you're in a buggy, or you're in a wagon, or you're on a horse, and you're coming from the East Coast, you're gonna stop in Santa Fe and start studying turquoise. But you didn't have a concept that there's turquoise in California, there's turquoise in Colorado, there's turquoise in southern New Mexico, there's turquoise lots of places. So if the history of turquoise in the Western Hemisphere, in the study of it academically, if we had, as a people, we started in California, where they have stone hammer mines, which means they have stone hammers, then we would know all about the California history of turquoise. But we didn't. We started in New Mexico. If we had gone farther north, we would hear very much about Villa Grove, turquoise. If we had started farther south, we'd hear all about Hechita. So it is a abstract reason that has to do with history and trade on how Cerrillos became the center of the study of turquoise, and it has to do with how everybody got there. And that's a big influence, but it shouldn't be the only influence. So another way that we would study history and be influenced by it is there was a friar that came out with the conquerors of the conquistadors. And this friar's job was to track and write about the events that happened as they came through North America. So this friar wrote that when they saw the Native Americans or the indigenous people of this area, they were draped with turquoise necklaces and earrings and all kinds of drape. And that's great, but we can look at that, but if I look anywhere else in the world, if I look at Lord Sapan in Chile with the Moche culture, I see all of those artifacts. If I look at Mesoamerica and I look at the Aztec or the Toltec, I see those artifacts. You can see them in museums, you can see them in collections. If I go to Iran or if I go to anywhere else in the world, I will see turquoise artifacts that are talked about in history. But if I come to America and I try to find what the friar documented of people draped in turquoise, they're gonna show me a bone with a single dot of turquoise on it. Or they're gonna show me a basket, one, that is inlaid in turquoise pieces. But the art and the mining and the production does not exist to what the friar said. And so you have to look at the anthropology of it. If he's saying this, why would he say it if we don't have any of the artifacts? Because scientifically, we have to have the artifacts to prove our theory. We can't just say, well, that doesn't make any sense. No, you have to have the artifacts. Otherwise, it just is a theory, and we have to entertain other theories also. And so, with the friar, I would say he worked for a king. And when he came over here and they didn't find much, his life is on the line. It was a different world back then. Me, I'd be like, wow, there was so much turquoise, I need to go back. And most people are starting to agree that he exaggerated what he saw, because there is no evidence. The next category that came, Santa Fe Trail in that sense, was the Hyde Expedition. And all of these people I think are cool as heck, but when we look at their knowledge, we have to place it, instead of having it mystical, we need to actually have it placed in history. In the Hyde Expedition, they came out and they did all kinds of studies on the Cerrillos area, because that's what has become known. So they stopped, Cerrillos, here we are. And one of their categories was, oh my gosh, look at all of these tailings. There must have been tons of turquoise that was mined because of all of these tailings. Now the Hyde expedition, I think that's true, except for, as a miner, and you ask, how much turquoise do you get per ton of rock moved on the average? And it's not much. They did not know that category because they were not turquoise miners. So for an archaeologist to understand and relate what they do find, they need more knowledge than going to school and being an archaeologist. We need inclusion of the miner. Who are the miners? What did they say? What did they mine? And who were they? The next one, we start finding out who they are. And so there were some killer, colorful people that have mined turquoise. But they started mining the turquoise, Cerrillos, because it becomes the go-to point because people on the East Coast have heard about it. And so the whole progression continues. And so there's books written or magazines or the little articles that they would write about the gunfighter or out west and all of those things. And that mystique took on more and more and more to where that, if you look at Santa Fe today, it's dang impressive, the money, but it wasn't originally that way. And so there were lots of different areas, but always Cerrillos first. Always, because that's where we started as a culture on the East Coast. All right, in later memoirs, then you had geologists and mineralogists and promoters come. You can read books that have chosen to gently speak to the validity of how much a promoter is honest and dishonest to getting things, money raised back needs to come out and mine turquoise. I'll leave it at that. Well, I stay positive on this part. But the romance of turquoise, absolutely cool. I am thankful for the romance of turquoise. I don't want to live in Iran. No offense to Shahryar or anybody else, but I like here. I'm happy. But there are several things in history that are left out. And until we face them and put them to the side, we will never learn the mineralogy and do a true study on turquoise. So here's one just to give you an easy one. The Turquoise Trail. They created a whole economic impact of what the Turquoise Trail is. It goes from Albuquerque, back road, all the way to Santa Fe. And they created the Cerrillos Hills, which tells you that there was this massive trade route that went all the way down to Mexico, or what is now Mexico, and they came all the way up here for all of their turquoise and all of the Mesoamerican masks and all of their artifacts came from Cerrillos. Those were the scientists, those were the archaeologists, but they never had been anywhere else except Cerrillos. So, does anybody know how, I'm sure there are some, the Turquoise Trail got its name? It was actually a contest, 1956. A woman won the contest, and it was for the highway that starts behind Albuquerque, but then goes to, on a dirt road, it cuts back and goes to I-25 to the Pueblos. It never went, the original Turquoise Trail never went to Madrid, it never went to Golden, it never went to Cerrillos, and it never went to Santa Fe. It was marketing. And a woman named Ruth Armstrong was the one that won. She came up with Turquoise Trail. And on that part of the trail, there's not any hardly at all turquoise. That's farther. Get into the Cerrillos town area. Then you're going to be getting that 3.5 miles of turquoise bearing rock. But that's left out of history because there's a trade route. Because we all started our history at Cerrillos for turquoise. And so you may think I'm picking on Cerrillos. I'm not, but that's where our history begins. Not negative about that. So then you have, again, human nature and how we all talk. And I don't know how many of you all know. I own the Turquoise Museum. So visitors at the Turquoise Museum, we do just less than 1.2 million a year on visitation, which is a cool number, just less. Sounds good, and I'm not lying, but we don't do that many at all. But I can say less And that modifier gives me what I think I want. A reputation, whatever you want to do. Well, when you interview a miner on turquoise, no offense to some of the miners in the room, we have modifiers for how much we mined in turquoise and how good it is. Because it's personal to us. We mind it. We want people to like it. We want to find that next piece. And that gets into supply and demand and money. So one of the points that always frustrated me about Cerritos is I've mined turquoise and I've interviewed miners, and when I go look at all of the tailing piles in Cerritos, and you go into, Doug Magnus has done an incredible job preserving what is to me one of the most important areas, is Turquoise Hill. When you go, there's a tunnel, goes 300 yards straight into the hill. It is a cool tunnel. There's another tunnel that goes about 250 yards straight into the tunnel. Well, I happen to know, like everybody else, turquoise is water created, meaning that the water comes in, seeps in, all the way down the hillside, collects mineralogy, redeposits it, and all that good stuff. It's a sedimentary formation. Downhill. So if I look at a tunnel that goes into a hillside straight, then I know they didn't find very much turquoise, because that's not how turquoise forms, right? So that's knowledge. It doesn't mean that they didn't dig deeper, but we would have to prove it, not say it. Well, they probably went down here 400 feet. Well, I don't know very many areas that are stone tool areas that would go down that far, but maybe. Now, in Egypt, they had stone, they had metallurgy. I can see it. So there's lots of myth that has been promoted over and over and over because turquoise was becoming more and more identified with the American Southwest and the Native American cultures. And it continued to build on itself. And to untie it almost sounds negative, but to untie it's the only way we're going to get to the truth on turquoise. So if you think that's crazy and you think no, scientists are straight up all the time and their personalities don't get involved and all of those kinds of things, I'm going to show you a category. Assuming everybody's heard of the British Museum? Mm-hmm. Little place. That's a place to go. They did a book on turquoise and their artifacts, and they interviewed and they studied out with this group that only knows Cerritos. And this group has gone back for several generations of people in a closed society that only talk to one another. It's one of the coolest echo chambers you can ever enjoy. No joke. And when you look and you see this map, that is, directions are not my strength. One on the left, okay. This is out of their study of their 9 Mesoamerican artifacts. And they got together with this group and they all studied turquoise, and you can read the book. It's a cool book. And it says what science they use, new science that proves that all of the turquoise in those Mesoamerican artifacts came from Cerritos or Lone Mountain. There is not one dot in what is now Mexico. You're studying Mesoamerican artifacts, and you did not study one piece of turquoise from Mexico. You gotta ask yourself, why would you do it that way? So if you say, well, turquoise, there is no turquoise in Mexico, cool, there are books that say that. But I'm gonna I go back 100 years and show you maps that map the Mexican turquoise mines and whatever. But just to show you one, the British Museum published theirs in 2006. The middle is a Mexican publication about artifacts in that area and that time frame of Mesoamerica, and that's published in 1997. They have turquoise sites in Mexico. How did the British Museum miss that? And Time to call it? No. Alright, so. My grandfather, with Oscar Branson's book that he did in 1975. There's a color page, turquoise from Mexico. How did the British Museum miss that? There are many publications, like I said, with detailed maps. I have journals and things that have documentation of turquoise mines in Mexico for over 100 years. Leonard Hardy's going to be inducted to the Hall of Fame in tonight's banquet. He was the king of turquoise. There's 3 kings of turquoise in the history of America in that sense. My grandpa was one, yes, he was a collector. L.W. Hardy built the industry, tons of turquoise. Cerrillos and Sleeping Beauty, that was his world. He created all of that. J.W. Edgar in Nevada, incredible owner of multiple mines, knew how to find new mines, all that kind of stuff. There's some incredible people in these histories, but they're left out of the studies when it comes to archaeology. And, but there are so many categories. Well, L.W. Hardy was also the king of Mexican turquoise. How come they didn't interview him? You don't know who L.W. Hardy is, you did back in the day. Big guy in the industry. So, hopefully, a little bit, I'm trying to get you to realize that turquoise needs to be a broader study, not started in Cerrillos. That is the white man's beginning, not the beginning. It's a source, not the source. Another fun one to wonder about the different studies that have been done on turquoise. Most of the Mesoamerican artifacts, like this serpent here, have what we call spiny oyster, also inlaid with the turquoise. Some of the largest sources of turquoise in what is now Mexico are found in Baja California. Did you know that the only place in the Western Hemisphere you can find spiny oyster is in the Sea of the Baja? I forget the name of it, Sea of whatever it is, Cortez. The Sea of Cortez is the only source for spiny oyster in the Western Hemisphere. So if you're looking at spiny oyster and you're looking at turquoise together, you would think logically you could come to a conclusion and go, wonder if they got that near the same place that they got the other. So there are ways to see, and there are artifacts that should be guiding us in our study of origin of turquoise. But that means it's gonna have to be dang inclusive, because I'm not gonna go down to Mexico all the time. I need them. They're not gonna come up here. There has to be a study that is complete, that is inclusive, so we can find the answers out, because I think the answers are gonna be cool. The Cerrillos, as I call it, the Cerrillos agenda continued, and I'll finish up and then we'll move into science. But Joseph Pope wrote a book in 1915 without Google. It is the most amazing book that you could ever find, and wonder how the heck did he get all of that information globally. He has the mystical qualities of Egypt with Hathor, Queen Hathor. He has the Middle East, he has China, he has 1915. I mean, he just, and the science that he did, and it's amazing what this guy did. But turquoise, or turquoise, without the E, was his accomplishment. Killer book. One of the things, as a writer and writing things, we have to interview people. The problem is that we always run into people who are exaggerating, and we have to write our books and we have to write the information. So when I read this book many years ago, and I've read it many times, if you think you want to learn turquoise, that's a book you need to have in your library, along with all the rest of them. There's a lot. Somebody has this knowledge, they write a book, somebody has this knowledge, and it goes from there. But Pope he doesn't give his source, but he makes the statement that between 1890 and 1900 was the most productiveness of the mining of the Cerrillos area, and they produced almost over $2 million in money at that mine in those 10 years. I know that's not true. I know it. I know it. I know it. I spent years knowing it. But I didn't find the key to prove it until years later in another book. And so reading and hearing all of the information and getting the broad interpretations is what allows us to actually then be specific. But before I give you the answer to that one, we'll go to the next picture in the middle, which is out of the book, Oscar Branson's book, Turquoise, the Gem of the Centuries. So this was the first time in the history of America that we were showing the world that we had turquoise that was as good as yours. Because until then, the market and the icon of the market was the Iranian turquoise. And so the dealers would say, Grandpa would too, this turquoise is just as good as Persian, because they were the lead. But with the middle class in America, that had changed, and now we had our own economy that loved Indian jewelry set with turquoise. And so this was their response. Grandpa has special acknowledgments in the back of his book, and this is why I know this story. Like in the earlier, people were asking, so the Zachary process. There are stories out there. Yep. Some of you can tell, some you can't. I'm going to tell this one. So people use this as a reference, especially archaeologists, because they want the old references. It's like people didn't lie when they were older. It's a new invention. The friar did not exaggerate. That's not true. So on this page that is within the Gem of the Centuries, it is showing you Sirius turquoise. They had a problem to publish this book. They're trying to say that our turquoise is as good as anywhere in the world, especially Persia, because they're trying to market turquoise. The problem is everybody in the world has only heard of Sirius. That's where all the tests are. If you went back to Pope, 1915, he's going to mention certain areas, but Sirius is the icon. The rest of the world, if you go to them and you say, hey, where's this turquoise from? They'll tell you, this is Chinese, this is Mexican, this is Persian. The reason is that the American market is different, whereas like in Zhoushan, China, when I'm there, they have a whole mountain range. It's called Zhoushan. So if you say, so what's this mine called? If they even know what you're talking about, they'll say Zhoushan. But generally, they'll just say it's Chinese turquoise. And in America, we could have a mountain range, and there are 5,000 mines on that mountain range because we each own a claim or we each own a mine. And so it created a whole different dynamic. And it gets important when we get into, when you saw with Dr. Palke, he put that chart up and they had the circles to where they had a little bit of intersection, but not much for the three, what kind was that?
Alright,
Okay, the tourmaline?
Yeah.
And then he said, but if we had 5 more sources of tourmaline, then it would get messy. Well, in turquoise, there's thousands. So one of the reasons why that's important in our study on turquoise is it doesn't have to be thousands. We can start smaller, we can start large. So in our study, we could start with regions. And can we prove the region instead of the mine? Or can we prove the mineral structure of a turquoise and then within itself continually out? Does it work in principle? So there's ways to do this study, but we can't have just a single source as the main ingredient. So here's how some things go wrong. You're trying to prove that ours is as good as yours. If you notice the piece of turquoise in the upper corner, it's clear. That's telling Iran, our clear turquoise is just as blue and just as good as yours. And so they did a map in this book, and every mine had its classics. Lone Mountain, they put a clear as much piece as they could. Because the whole point was to say ours is as good as yours. Well, Lone Mountain is famous for spiderweb. So in this picture, there are only 2 pieces of Sirius. There's Persian, because that's how you're just as good as them. And there is Tyrone, which is your best New Mexico turquoise. But we don't tell you that in the picture, because the whole point of the picture is to say our turquoise is as good as your turquoise. But we can't, because Sirius doesn't come in these types of colors. so it causes problems. And so when I first started arguing with a lot of the archaeologists, they would take me to this picture. And I'm like, I know how that picture came about, I can show you the categories. So not all books are right, including mine. We all have mistakes. So if we're going to get to the studies, we also have to pay attention. In my book in 2010, going back to what different people have written, 2020, I'll read you the quotes, but the one of them on page 70, I say the mosaic art of the Mayan and Aztec culture is famous around the world. Unfortunately, the turquoise deposits that produce the turquoise decorating these elaborate mosaics are still not given proper credit. If you can imagine this, we have Native American artists that deserve credit for the piece that they make. Can you imagine if they said, well, you know, that's made in China? You'd be a little upset. That's not fair. As research continues, the mine sources of turquoise that were available for the Mesoamerican cultures will help revise written trade history. Page 76 says, as more is learned about the great history of turquoise mining in Mexico, these turquoise mines will gain their rightful place in history. So why don't we give them their rightful place in history? It's called money, tourism. People come here. You would not believe how many people come to the museum and they're like, why is there turquoise in Nevada? I thought turquoise was only from New Mexico. And then there's the crazy ones, no offense if this is one of you. Why does China have turquoise? And it's like, how do I answer that question? You know, because you know why they're asking it, but that's not a compliment. And so you just look at them and it's like, it's a rock. It has anything to do with politics. The rock formed in, anyways. But that's out there. Why is that out there? Those aren't stupid people. It's out there because if we can get you here, you're gonna spend your money here. Big time. So, accountability. It is time that Mesoamerican turquoise history, artifacts, and mines are given their proper place in history. They have an incredible history, and it didn't come from here. We need a tectonic, it's called humor, shift within the academic community. A clean slate is needed. Questions would be, are the past studies, books, and articles reliable to use and include in future studies? The answer is yes. But the caveat is, find the right information within the books. Should we trust researchers who won't notice the obvious? Mexico has turquoise, lots of it. And how should we use all of the information? Scientific method, finally here. How has science been applied to fingerprint turquoise? Incorrectly is the answer. Some of the last attempts at testing the theory of fingerprinting turquoise pursued identifying the lead and the strontium isotope ratios to identify regional sources. And it's not that the scientists are going about things wrong, they're actually going about it logically. We have our tests that we do also, and we've done the same tests they've done. And our tests came to the same conclusion. That didn't work. It's just the way it is. It's how you keep growing. But in developing the science and applying the science, you have to have knowledge of the bigger picture first, otherwise you can't see. And that's what's been missing. They can't see, and they're not including everybody and giving everybody the credit they deserve. You can't test a piece of turquoise unless somebody gives it to you. They're just as important as you are, otherwise you couldn't test the turquoise. There's an inclusion and a respect that it gives a paper or a presentation that value of people that in that conversation to help us be accountable. As far as analyzing turquoise, we did this study, I don't remember when we did this study, 2019 I guess was the results, took 3 years. But this was Turquoise Museum, me, and then Jorg Herman and Thierry Sarnet. And it was done in France. And what we were trying to do is start small. So there's two ways we can do the studies that are coming up. We can go big and try to make it small. We can go regional, or we can start at a category and try to work our way out and then see how things progress. And like Dr. Balke said, we're not sure we can do it just because turquoise is so unique in so many of its mineralogies. But are there any distinguishing differences in the chemistry of blue turquoise? So we were only going to test blue. And what I did is I supplied specific categories. So with a stone, you can have a stone that has different gradations of color of blue. So we did one that had 3 to see if they would test the same or if the variables would be different. We tested blue turquoise from the same mine but different areas. We tested turquoise that was from Arizona and turquoise that was from New Mexico, and then we tested turquoise that was from South America. All clear, not testing any of the host rocks, just to see if in that small test there would be variations to where we could identify the turquoise, not the host rock. And if you can tell by the conclusion, and it's a small study, those are the pieces that were in the study, it didn't work. The variables are not wide enough for us to say, okay, let's test and invest in a whole nother group test to see if we can get something different. So we specifically chose those samples so they were global as well as regional as well as individual. And the variations were not enough to tell.